Hello, and welcome to the Strategy Supper Club. So this week's session got a little bit philosophical. We talked about the principles that we can deploy to help our clients and brands navigate chaos and change. But then we got into how those same principles can help us in our own journeys navigate chaos and change. So as ever, you're going to see a live teaching of the class that we recorded on Zoom. We have some cut together Q&A because we had several different sessions. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to me on Twitter, and we hope to see you in a supper club session very soon.
So the genesis of this has been that one of the things I've been thinking about a lot as I've been trying to take my daily walks and move around is that, one, the only constant is change. And in some ways, that's a very heartening sentiment. It's also a sentiment that whenever I resist it, I tend to run into problems in my own life. Whenever I try to lock in and keep things the way they are, or try to go back to the way that things were before, I find myself having a lot of issues with that and a lot of struggle. But when I think that the only constant is change, that actually calms me down in a very weird way. And as I was thinking about how we navigate change, especially now, a lot of the principles that I am using to talk to my clients about and navigating change are actually a lot of the principles that I'm using to talk to a lot of my friends and the people I mentor about navigating change. And so I tried to do this presentation here where I'm putting parallel principles down to show how the same principle can apply to brand and it can apply to our own lives. And we'll see if it works. We'll see what you guys think. What I do think in this era, and when I mean this era, I actually mean this century, because change is happening constantly and at a rate that is much more rapid than change has happened in earlier eras. I think the only way to thrive is to be able to get comfortable and powerful in navigating change. When I think about how things worked in the 20th century, there were these paths that were set out for most of us, and you kind of locked into the path early in your life, and you just started to, check off the boxes, get the degree or not, or, get that first job, work your way up the ladder, get married, have kids, buy the house. Like there was almost like this set rule and the set path that a lot of people clicked into and followed. And you didn't really have to think that much if you didn't want to. You could just kind of like click into the rhythm and life would be pretty good. I think the issue that we're running into now in the modern era is that these paths have been completely blown open and blown apart. Systems are breaking down. Almost every single system I can think of in the United States, at least, is breaking right now. The education system doesn't seem to be working. The food system doesn't seem to be working that well. Our health system isn't working that well. Our political system is under creak. And so these systems that really held up the 20th century are really starting to creak and fall apart in the 21st century, and their weaknesses are being very explicitly exposed. And you add the digital revolution on top of that, where we're all talking about it and experiencing it and seeing it at a much faster rate. I think the only thing that we can do right now is acknowledge that these paths that we thought we were going to be on, that were underpinned by these systems, they just aren't existing anymore. And right now, it's just a bunch of pieces that are broken apart in society. And we need to figure out how we navigate this, both in the way that we advise the brands that we work on and build the brands that we work on, but also in our own lives, because we just can't click in, turn off our mindfulness and just let it carry us along. We have to look at this kind of broken landscape in front of us and see where the exciting opportunities are, and also see where we don't want to go. And that just takes a lot more work. It takes more work in brands, and it takes more work in our own lives. But I think that is the only way to thrive, is just to acknowledge that all we have in front of us is change. And we have to, instead of trying to search desperately to go back to a system where everything was laid out for us, instead really wrapping our arms around that change and thriving, because we're just being completely at peace with the context that we're living in, which is a very difficult place to get to, and a place that I don't get to very often. But when I do feel at peace with the fact that everything is chaotic, I actually find myself being able to navigate that much more powerfully. So I do think that there's common principles in doing brand navigation and personal navigation. And we're going to talk through some of those principles today. But just a quick note, because it's like, who's Heidi to do this talk or to do this lesson? Like, why do I think that I might be helpful in doing this? And it's really two reasons. I've been working in the space for quite some time, and I've worked on lots of brands and worked on brands through, the 2008 recession, and at the very beginning of the 2001 shake that happened there. So I've gone through it a couple times with brands, and I've seen brands have to navigate change in many different ways. But also I would say in my own life, ever since 10 years ago when I was 31 years old, I've had a very non-linear career. From age, 22 to 31, I was on the ladder, and I was working that ladder really hard. And I was, on that path and really like ticking off those boxes like we talked about before. And at 31, I kind of self blew up my career, and I quit my big job, and I bought a truck, and I drove around the country for 2 years, and I lived out of the truck. And then I started a company. And then I left the company in the hands of my partners, and I went and worked for another company and uprooted my life and lived in California to go work for Big Philanthropy, which isn't brand, right? And then I got fired from the Big Philanthropy, and I came back to New York, and my partners quit the company. And so I shut down the company. And so when I think about my path over the last 10 years, it's been full of not a journey that hasn't been very linear. It's been a journey that I've had to really be mindful about next steps, as opposed to locking into someone else's idea of what I should be doing. And so hopefully my last 10 years can be helpful in people who might be navigating that kind of change for the first time as a result of this pandemic. So we'll see if it's helpful. Okay. The first thing that I think is really important when we think about powerful navigation is to know your core assets. I think navigation just requires brutal honesty about your situation, especially when you are in the midst of chaos or the midst of change. So when I think of that from a brand perspective, when I'm talking to my clients right now, the conversations I'm having with them is like, let's be really straight up about your business realities. Some of my clients are in overproduction because they have goods that everyone wants right now. So their supply chain can't keep up. And there's a lot of stress around their system in that way. Some of my other clients are where I think a lot of us are right now. They're in deficit, where they are looking down the barrel of cash flow that's being cut in a really significant way, and they have to get to certain targets by a certain time, or else they're going to have to radically change their business. And I find that in moments of these change and chaos, the more honest you can be about those conversations with your clients about what's really going on with their business, the more effective you can be in helping them. The next thing that I look for in brands in this moment, when there is a moment of like, okay, all hands on deck, is what are the known capabilities in a client's organization? So when I say capabilities, I mostly mean the people inside of it. Like, who do you have that are really good at certain things? Where are your powerful departments? Where are your powerful teams? Where are your powerful people? And how can we best deploy them to help solve some of those business realities and problems that you're facing? And building on top of that, develop tools. So do they have a really great social presence that has helped them in the past? And how can we leverage that social presence? Do they have a fantastic CRM program? Do they have a really great relationship with their distributors? What tools have they built up until now that we can really exploit and lean on in a moment when things are going sideways? So really just doing that audit of the brands, of like the core business situation, is always super helpful in a moment of navigation, chaos, and change. And I also think that works a lot for ourselves when we are facing a new change or a new sense of chaos. The first thing I did when I got fired, like I think it was like a year and a half ago, was I did a really hard financial audit of my life and figured out, what I need to survive. What's my overhead? What is my business reality of my own life? So I find that sometimes people are wary of talking about personal finances or doing those types of audits because they're a little bit scary, but it feels a lot better on the other end after you've done it. So I always really encourage people when they get fired or they decide to go freelance, like make sure you understand your financial underpinning and make sure it's tightened right. The next thing that I do in these moments of chaos and change is I really think through my support systems. Who are the people that I have around me that are going to support me in this moment, that might be able to help me in this moment? Who can I lean on? And it's taken me a really long time to get comfortable with that in my life. In my 20s, I think I tried to lean on nobody. But you get knocked on your ass a few times and you realize you really can't do it alone. So something I like to do is just kind of figure out like who are my people in these moments. And then the third thing that I really lean into in moments of chaos and change are what are my hard skills? Like, sure, there's a lot of things I would love to do. Like, I have it in my mind someday that I'm going to write a book, right? But I'm not writing a book right now because my business in the beginning of the pandemic contracted a bit. And my hard skill is that I'm a really fucking good brand strategist. So in this moment of just making sure that my finances are being covered, I'm leaning into my hard skills in a really big way. And it's really knowing with absolute clarity, what is it that I can offer the world? And what is it that I can make money doing? What are those hard skills that I'm really good at? So this is just like a basic asset audit that I ask my brands and I ask myself or my friends to do when we hit these moments of change. The next thing that we need to know about is that knowing your drive. Like I alluded to in the beginning of this conversation, like because the context is so murky in this era that we're living in, I don't think that murkiness is going to go away. We really have to have a self-awareness about where we want to go. Because inevitably, when something like this happens, when our world gets blown up, whether it's our personal world or the world at large, there's always these ways, there's always an opportunity that comes out of it. There's always glimmers of like where we can go, maybe places that we wouldn't have gone before. And to be able to really chase after one of those glimmers and know where you should go next, you really have to have the self-awareness about what you're about in your own life or in your own brand. So from a brand standpoint, when I'm asking the clients about their drive, I ask them things like, what are you really credible with clients? Like, where are people going to give you permission to do things and have conversations? And where are you going to be able to stretch that credibility so that you can start to adjust to this context that you're trying to adjust to while being rooted in where you have that credibility with your audiences at large? What is the truth about who you are? A lot of times in times of fat, when the economy is rolling and money's coming into businesses can get a little fuzzy. They can start to like take on extra projects. They can start to like think, well, maybe we should go this way, maybe we should go that way. And it's fine to do that exploration. I always think businesses need to keep innovating and exploring, but sometimes those explorations get out of sync with the DNA of the company and what they're really about. And in a moment like this, I like to almost do like what I call corporate brand therapy, where I'm like, tell me what you're really about. Tell me about like why you started this company. Tell me about the kinds of problems that you wanted to fix. Tell me about the audiences that you really wanted to serve. What is your core truth? And it's really important sometimes to take our brands back to that core truth. And building on that, it's not only just the core brand truth of like what a brand has done and why it started, but a real truth about where the brand wants to go. So similar to what we just talked about a second ago, a lot of times when companies are flush with money, they will start to build off all these little side projects, all these little side things. And sometimes they turn into these projects that like no one's really looking after anymore, but they keep getting funded. It's like you get these weird tentacles sometimes in companies that don't make a lot of sense and that don't really align with who the brand really is at its core and where the brand desperately wants to go and what the impact that they want to make in the world. So it's really important, just as much to understand your roots, it's also really important to understand what is your true ambition. And so this is just really about like truth, right? And this is like the stuff we go to therapy for. It's like, what are you really all about? And in moments of chaos, I think it's really important to understand what you're really about, because as you look out into the world and as brands look out into the world, a fractured world has a lot of different places that you can go. And being able to navigate that fractured world brilliantly means you actually have to do the navigation and not try to click into a path. And it's so similar for us, right? Like one of the first questions I'll ask is my friends is like, what's your reputation? Like, what are you known for? Where do you have credibility in your professional space? What can you double down on in this moment then and really exploit so that people really know that you're here and you're ready to work and you're ready to do things? What is the truth about who you are? The truth about what drives you in the work that you do? And what is the truth about your own ambitions? Again, it's like when you know those things, it's a lot easier to see where the path ahead of you lights up versus where you shouldn't be going. And I think a lot of things that happen in this era especially is that we feel that there's so many different directions we can go. There's so many different things that we can pursue. And it's true. When paths explode, they actually create like a million little paths that like are all very seductive. And so really knowing who you are and where you want to go will make it very clear which paths you should pursue and which ones you shouldn't. Okay. The next thing I think that's really important in eras of context and change is that context of change just means that the world is evolving, and it's evolving at a rapid rate. And we have to evolve along with it as well. Hold on one second. I think I just got to let someone in. Okay, there we go. 1 second. So we have to evolve with those pathways as well. And so I'm a big believer in testing the waters, using that, like, this is what I'm all about. This is the capabilities I have. This is what I'm really want to do, and use that knowledge and that truth as the springboard to evolution. So when it comes to brands, number one is just being really comfortable with the fact that there is a new contextual story going on. I think one of the more dangerous things that we can do with our brands right now is, well, there's two things we can do. One, we can either put our head in the sand and act like everything's just going to go back to normal. It's not. But another thing that is also equally as dangerous is act like the world is ending and everything's going to change and nothing's ever going to be the same again. And the truth is, change is incremental, and change happens more slowly than that. So having a new contextual story where you're really being honest about like what's being left behind and what opportunities are opening are super important. Just having that reality check. And then it's a question of, okay, if my context has changed, and using the root of who I am and what this brand is all about, what kind of new conversations can a brand have then? If the context has changed, how can the brand apply what it is fundamentally about to go and talk about things that are new or make things that are new? And I put this note at the bottom of this, that it all has to be rooted, right? It all has to be rooted in that, I hate this word, the authenticity of the brand, but it does. And the story is the exact same on our side, right? I think it's a lot of wasted energy moaning right now, oh, I can't wait till things go back to how they were. They're not going to go back to the way they were. They're just not. And so the faster that you can wrap your head around the fact that there's a new contextual story around us, there's a new environment that you're living in, I think the faster that you can move powerfully in it. Let me just tell you a really quick personal story around this. When I got fired 18 months ago and then closed my company, for I would say over a year, all I wanted was to go back to how I felt before it all went down. I just wanted to feel that sense of flow again. I wanted to feel normal. I wanted to feel like my talents were appreciated. I wanted just to have the same feelings that I had before everything went tits up. And I kept trying to grab it really hard. And I kept searching for it. And I kept wanting to go back to a way that I felt and a way that I was in the world before it all happened. And that caused me so much anxiety trying to do that, because at the end of the day, it was impossible for me to go back. That whole situation, that whole context was done. It was done and dusted. And the moment that I said to myself, the only constant is change, and your context has changed, and you have a new story around you, a huge weight dropped off of me. And for the first time, I think I was able to see clearly what the future could be, as opposed to chasing after what the past was. And so I'm a big believer in both brands and individuals being just really honest about where we are now versus trying to chase where we were then. And as soon as I was able to embrace the new contextual story about my life, then it was so much easier to start having new conversations and try new things. Strategy Supper Club included in that try new things. And I was actually listening to a podcast this last weekend that I just wanted to share, this sidebar about small bets. I was listening to a podcast, this man being interviewed, his name is Stan Druckenmiller, and he is like one of the most successful investors ever of all time. And I don't really know the investing world that well, But from everything I could gather in the way that the hosts were talking to him and the verbiage that surrounded this man, he's like a stone cold OG badass investor, like one of the dudes. And he was talking about how, as an investor, sometimes he feels like he can read the market. And then there are times when his instincts get off and he can't read the market and he starts to lose money. And he said, and the way he talked about this is, so often in the investment world, when an investor starts to lose money and their instincts get off, the impulse in that moment is to put down some really big bets to prove that you got it, and to go all in and just be like, fuck it, I'm just going for it. And I'm just gonna like get back to my swagger and get back to the energy that I know. And he actually talked about this in relation to, this is the psychology of how Las Vegas works, in that when people start to lose, they actually start to bet more money because they're just desperate to get back out on top and break even in the casinos. But he said that what he does instead is, when he starts to realize that his context has changed, that he's not quite engaging with the market in the way that he's engaged in the past, instead of making the ego driven choice of trying to rush back and be as powerful as possible, as quickly as possible, and show the world that he still has it, he actually backs off and he starts making smaller bets. And he will start to put money in a lot of different places, little hunches, little things he thinks might be right. And so he can observe what happens, and he can relearn his instinct for the new context that has changed. And I thought that was a really powerful story, in that a lot of times when we lose our position in the world, one of the first things our ego wants us to do is just like rush back and get another big job or get right on track as quickly as possible. But in Stan's philosophy is, if you push that, it actually rarely ever works. So you end up losing even bigger. But if you have the discipline to try some new things, try writing that blog post, try doing that podcast, try, writing that book or whatever it is. And you just have a try mentality and you don't put the pressure on yourself. You actually end up getting your instinct back a lot faster and can thrive that much more quickly in the new context that you're in. And I thought that was really cool. And I wanted to share that with everyone. Okay. And then the last point that I want to talk about is, this is just an underlying life philosophy that I've learned. I wish I would have learned it 20 years ago. Unfortunately, I only learned it like 2 years ago. And this is the concept of love versus fear. And the philosophy is that every single action that every human on the earth takes is either rooted in love or it's rooted in fear. So every negative reaction that we have is actually because we're afraid of something. And if you're lashing out in anger, or you're mad about something, or you're sad about something, trace it back to that underlying fear that is driving that emotional reaction. Or if you're really open about something, or you're really generous, or you're really feeling like you're behaving in a way that's really powerful in the world, it's probably because your actions and your motivation are coming from love. And so every time that I find myself acting in a way that I'm not particularly happy about in myself, I'll ask myself, Heidi, what are you afraid of? And as soon as I can figure out what I'm afraid of, it allows me to shift over to a love motivation and start to work out in a different way. So I think there's a real strong brand parallel with this, in that, brands in moments of change and chaos, they really get their power not by being afraid of what they're losing, but by being generous with what they have, by going out and figuring out how they can really double down in serving their audiences and really be a powerful ally to the people out in the world. And this requires that a brand stays really open to what people need, and to really listen and learn to what people are saying and what the environment is saying, so that they can best figure out how to use their power in a very good way. Because that using a power of generosity is inherently attractive. People will come to you when you're more generous. And I think brands, especially in these moments where everything's going crazy, can really gain a ton by thinking about, how can I be generous, right? And the exact same principles, I think, apply to us. Our power, whenever we can translate that into generosity, like, what am I really good at that could help other people right now? Even if it's just, I'm really good at remembering to text people, so I'm just going to say hello to some friends that I think are struggling. Like, that's something that I'm a big believer in karma, that's all going to come back. And it requires us to stay open and to stay really, open to what the world might be telling us, and to really listen to the feedback we're getting and to learn from it instead of putting our walls up and being afraid of change. So love versus fear. It was a concept that changed my life. And I think, and I've used it with a lot of brands, especially with brand managers. When I feel them clenching up, I say to them, like, what are you afraid of? Like, what are you afraid is going to happen? And as soon as we can identify what they're afraid of, it's so easy to jujitsu that and then go into a love space instead. It sounds a little hippy dippy, but it's worked too many times for me with my clients to say that it doesn't work. Okay. So the last thing I will say for individuals, and this is not with brands because brands aren't people, despite the Supreme Court saying that corporations are, but is that, we are different in brands and that we are emotional beings. And so if there's anything that I would say to people in this time is like, embrace the liminal. There's always these moments in our lives, like where we can't go back to where we were before, but we don't know where we're going next. And those liminal spaces can be really unsettling. But there's a lot of beauty in liminal spaces as well. And the more we can get comfortable with just saying, I don't know where I'm going next, but I'm trying to explore, the calmer we can be in these moments and the more powerful our next move can be. Remember to take care of yourself. I took a nap before this because I was just really tired, even though I have a deck to write, because I just needed 15 minutes of sleep. So don't be ashamed, especially in these weird moments, to take care of yourself and feel free to feel what you feel. I think one of the best things that I did when I got fired was that I was just really blunt and honest about the fact that I was pissed off and that I was angry and that I was hurt and that I felt betrayed. And I didn't try to stuff those feelings down. And I feel like it did take me a while to get through it because there were a lot of emotions for me in that moment of, getting fired and losing the company. But I really am through them now. And I don't think I would have been through them in 18 months had I tried to smash them down. So, do what you got to do. Like, go hit something like that's not a sentient living being. Like go hit a pillow or write in a journal or go yell in the woods, like whatever it is. But you should never feel afraid or ashamed to feel something. And then at the end of the day, do your best. And I think like there's a little bit of like quarantine shame going on right now. Like I have this one friend who seems to be cooking like the most amazing feasts every day while running a company in this era. And I'm just like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, but she's doing her best. Like that's what she can do. Whereas I can't right now. Like that's not what I can do right now. And so I just think for all of us, there's this idea of like, what is the best I can bring, and having grace about what that best is in that moment, and not trying to compare what you're doing today versus what somebody else is doing today. So that is my little philosophical thing. I would love to stop talking and hear from everybody else.
Do you have any advice on like breaking in? Like, I mean, my only agency experience is like freelance copywriting. Like, and I mean, like I'm a marketing director, like at a nonprofit, and I have experience doing brand strategy there, but like, I don't know, nobody's going to want to hire me.
Actually, that's not true. I mean, like somebody who's led marketing somewhere is a really strong person to have on the team. So I think the thing to think about is how can you frame something that you've done a case study in like brand strategy speak, so that you can show like, I have this amazing resume, I have this amazing life. Because I think like the best brand strategists have lived life. I hate when I see brand strategists get into the machine. I was in the machine, right? And they start to
I don't want to be in the machine either.
You're not going to be in the machine. You're not. And so like, I always look for brand strategists that haven't been in the machine. And if I think that they can do some of the fundamental exercises, then I'm like, cool, come on, let's do it. So I think it's about framing something you've done in the past.
Yeah.
A brand strategy case study.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
I just wanted to echo and say how much Corianda's point from a kind of creative and storytelling perspective is so important. I found myself throughout my career, and especially when I got fired and was trying to recreate like what was next, falling prey to the expected narrative that agencies and holding companies in a higher position all kind of dictated and mandated, and really underwhelming my own story about kind of a unique disconnected pathway. And so, Coriander, what I think you were just saying, like crafting your own story, Meredith, about what your strength is and where you come from, and then figuring out how that applies in these times. Like, I think it was a great point to say, okay, I'm not saying you were at small, but like I was at a small nonprofit. Nobody's going to take me seriously for the next big job. No, that means I was doing things in a very different way. I was helping people. And now as we're in a time where people need to make budgets stretch farther, need new ideas, need to come at this from a, what am I doing, as Heidi's point, how am I helping? Those are incredibly powerful points. So just lean in with those strengths and let your story be what they need, as opposed to trying to answer what they're asking for. I find it very tricky to answer what people are asking for, and the best you're ever going to get is a job that they're already expecting to fill. And that's a terrible recipe, ultimately. Creating a job that they don't even know they need yet and why you're uniquely suited to it is so much more powerful. So I just wanted to echo what I think, what I took away from Coriander was saying.
I love that, Nick. Thank you for sharing that perspective. And tomorrow I'm going to get to you in 1 second. I just want to share something for Meredith. One quick thing. I was being interviewed for a podcast a couple days ago, or about a year or so ago, right after the whole firing thing went down. And I said offhand, I'm like, yeah, in my career, blah, blah, blah. And the podcaster stopped me. He's like, well, I don't think of you as somebody that has a career because it's so weird what you've done in your life. And I'm like, part of me was like a compliment. Part of me was like, go fuck yourself. Like, just because it doesn't look like you think it's supposed to look, like, doesn't mean that there hasn't been steps and that things have not built on each other, So just echoing everyone else, like, be proud of the fact that it's your own journey and that you have like this authentic thing that you can bring. Because there's so many people who are brand strategists that stay in this machine. They rotate through the same agencies. They don't ever really go out and live. And yet brand strategists are supposed to be the ones that bring life into processes. Like, our job is to say, here's what people really think. Here's what's really going on in culture. But they're rotating through the same agencies. They're institutionalized. So having someone that's not institutionalized, who doesn't, quote unquote, have a career like me, which I thought was great when he said that, I think that's actually more beneficial to an organization than someone who's a machine strategist.
There's this sort of disconnect that happens when essentially you're like asking permission, right? So I've, never been able to enter agency land, but I've, so many interviews where like, this is interesting, we want to talk to you, but like never feeling like they could take the bet on me because I was so like not of the mold. And I found myself constantly kind of like going through this process where I was almost asking to be accepted, asking to be brought on board. And nothing, it just never clicked. But, what I've done instead is just keep going step by step closer to the thing that I want to do. And what's wonderful about strategy is that it comes in so many different flavors, right? It touches on everything. So you can take the piece of the world that you know really well and bring strategy into it. And maybe it's not what you're envisioning this big jump to be, because it's too big of a jump to envision at one time. But I think that you can shape this without having to go through a sort of known established path by going directly to organizations that you can help, right? I'm now working as a in-house consultant, and I love it, like so much more than I would ever want, probably enjoy an agency gig. But you just have to kind of be comfortable with, no one's going to pat you on the shoulder and be like, we're going to groom you for this thing. Like, you just have to bring yourself along for that process.
Maybe this is a little bit too broad a question, but I've just finished 2 books. One is called Why Americans Are Afraid of the Wrong Things. The other one is Arguing with Zombies by Paul Krugman, about economic systems and theory. So I guess my question is, when you think about these things, how much do you think about the macro environment? So obviously, we can think about how companies need to operate, but they operate often in a way that is determined by the narrative. And this narrative might be neoliberalism. I just read an article today where Levi's laid off thousands of people and gave lots of money to their shareholders. So how do you think about the, and I know the company you speak of that you worked for before, and, I have no love for them particularly, but so I was just thinking, how do you think about this change within that prevailing narrative, given that so many companies follow that narrative or sit in that system or in that ecosystem?
Yeah. I mean, that is such a great question, Theo. And it's something that sometimes makes me want to give up, because it feels like we are living in such a context of fear right now, and fear messaging on both sides, or whatever sides, all the sides, is a lot of the dominant form of messaging. The left uses it just as much as the right uses it. And so it puts us all in this like kind of heightened, like clenched state, because it is very dominant right now. I think the greatest act of resistance is to not fall prey to it personally, and not fall prey to it in your community, and to start the ripple effect from the bottom up as much as you can. I don't serve anybody that I touch well when I give into fear narratives and when I propagate them in their minds. No one behaves better. Like, we've all been to that dinner party where it all devolves into like how the world's going to shit and how it's all going to end, right? Or we used to go to that dinner party. But as I think there's a way of being realistic about what's going on in the world without delving into fear. And I don't think anything from the macro context is helping us stay positive. Or that's a strong statement. I think there's very few voices that are helping us stay positive from a macro standpoint. So it's up to us. And we have to find allies in that. I don't know what else to say,
Heidi can add one point.
Of course.
This is going to sound weird, but there are other people suffering worse than us.
Exactly.
And they need heroes.
Yeah.
So your fear may feel big, but theirs feels bigger. If you can go help someone who's in a deeper state of fear, it also helps you kind of realize what you're capable of. So just another thought. I'm working with a lot of brands who are in a terrible state of fear. So
I think that's such a great point. The idea of helping others puts our own in radical, sharp focus. Like, I'm working with an organization right now that serves, I would say, arguably the most vulnerable community in the United States. And it helps me. It helps me like keep it in perspective, So I think anytime we can be help and be generous, the generosity actually helps us as much as it helps the other people we're being generous to.
So I like the fact that you kind of put the brand that you're working with and the people you're talking with on a scale from thinking that after this, the world will come back to normal very quickly to the world will never be the same. And I'm wondering, because I feel that people are very in a sense of deep togetherness and a sense of collaboration right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering, is this going to stick, or this is just bullshit and that people will just come back to normal and do their own thing? Do you think this is something that spark a bit of sense of togetherness that will continue, or not at all?
So I'm going to answer this two ways. The first way I'm going to say is that culture always goes in waves, right? And we swing around the pendulum. We swing back and forth. I do think that this crisis has exposed how broken the system is in a way that hasn't been exposed in the modern era, and how damaging it is for vulnerable people. And so I do think that I hope that there's going to be a redesign in some effect of how it all works and how we relate to one another. But the second way I'd like to answer this question, Philippe, is to quote a mentor of mine. There's a woman, her name is Regina Dugan, and she was the former head of DARPA, which is like this crazy lab of like US defense where they just make crazy ass shit. Headed up innovation labs at Google twice, and then Facebook. So she is somebody who's always dealing in the future space, always. In fact, she has a really popular TED Talk that you should take a look at. And when I worked with Regina would get asked all the time, like, can you give us future predictions? Can you tell us what the future is going to be like, blah, blah, blah. And Regina hated that question. and she always refused to give future predictions. And her philosophy was, think about the future that you want and then go and make it. That's what I do. She's like, I think about what I want to exist in the world, and then I go make that shit. And it was a really like answer to that, right? And so in the spirit of Regina, and thinking of your question, Philippe, it's like, well, do you want the world to be more collaborative? Do you want it to be more community focused? Go do it. And I think we often sit back and we wait for other people to do that stuff for us, when actually a lot of the future gets made. The future doesn't just happen, it gets made. And so maybe that's something we all need to think about. And I mean the royal you, not like you all need to think about, just like, I think it's something we're all thinking about right now, is like, how do we want to live moving forward? We have a choice in that. We have a choice in the future that we want to make.
My question is, and please let me know if it's a little bit broad, as I think I'm still very much processing my thinking behind it. How do you scale some of the concepts and some of the advice that you have for us, be it personally or on a brand level? I have two examples that are kind of behind this question. Number one is I'm working on marketing strategy for a COVID relief fund right now, and something that I'm constantly hitting roadblocks is having come from a really huge firm where I worked on a Fortune 20 brand. The budget is very, very different now.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to kind of figure out how to scale some of the things I've learned prior to something much smaller and also more personally and community-wise impactful. Another thing is I'm thinking about my parent right now. My dad, who just lost his job due to COVID after working in the same company for 18 years. It's been really hard for me to process and also figure out how I, as a 25-year-old, can give advice to this 55-year-old man who's in a very different industry and different place in his life.
Right. I mean, for your first question, and thank you for sharing that. And
Yeah,
I really feel for your dad. So sending your dad good energy.
Thank you.
For your first question, like all of us go through this thing, like where we go from the massive budget to the micro budget. I think so many people on this video have experienced that whiplash that happens there. Whenever I experience that and I'm a little bit discombobulated, I look for other people or other examples of brands that, or people that have been working on brands or brands themselves, where I'm like, I know you don't have a ton of money, so I need to like examine how you did engagement so I can see what the tricks are. And there's actually a lot of stuff, not only in my own examination, but on the internet, about how you can hack a lot of this stuff. But generally, whenever I'm doing a hack like that, it's smaller teams, and I build a smaller team, and I make sure that everyone on the team can make stuff. There's no managing on the team. And so that things can move faster and more nimbly. So, that's a general management principle that I have when budgets are cheaper. And then I go try to find the hacks online. As far as like dealing with your dad right now without knowing your father, I'm guessing your dad needs some space just to feel, And I know when I got fired, a lot of people wanted to rush in and try to fix it for me, and be like, let's figure out how it's all going to be okay. Let's figure out like what you're going to do next. And all I really needed was people just to say like, I'm here. And if you need to talk, like, please call me. And I did call those people, but it usually wasn't on their schedule, because like my emotional schedule was way different than when they were, And so I think my friends were fantastic in that they were really, really flexible. When I needed them, they were there, but they didn't try to push in on me. And they just would gently remind me that they were there every, week or so, just checking in on you. Hope you're good. I'm here if you want to talk. And sometimes they would text me that 4 times before I would actually call them, because I, going through that, was not ready. It's emotional to talk about it. It takes a lot of energy, and you're already in an energy deficit when something like that happens to you. So I think like, just for any of us who are dealing with people who are, getting laid off right now, the most important thing is just let them know that you're there. Bump into them every once in a while, but don't try to don't try to rush in and fix it for them. Let them come to you.
Just one point on, I like to try and look at things personally, as in it's not a sprint, it's a marathon, right? Mm-hmm. So sometimes I can be quite guilty of burning myself out a little bit by trying to do too much at once. Yeah. And I think you had alluded on it by this initiative that you've started, right? Not kind of throwing yourself into everything, that's starting off small. I think what I'm struggling with at the moment is in work, helping guide my clients to thinking about, okay, this isn't just a sprint. How can we just start thinking to this is a marathon, and starting off small and not being like, well, we can't do anything because there's a million different things to do. When I suppose, how could I get that point across to them, that even doing something small is better than doing nothing at all?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think for me, I always remind my clients who they are at their root, and then to start from there. I think sometimes when we look out into the world for direction and we see all the million different options, we can very easily get overwhelmed. But when we think about like who we are as brands or who we are as people and what we're all about, and then think about how to approach those million options, it's a lot more easy to navigate and to act. And also just to know that again, it's exactly what you said. It's better to try than to do nothing at all. But I think what people don't act because they get scared and they freeze up, right? There's just like a freezing that happens. And a lot of times we freeze up when we feel like the external is happening to us. But when we reorient our brands to be like, what are you about? And what are you going to then move forward with? It can sometimes break the fear that you feel when you feel like the outside world is happening to you.
I had a question around I think it was on the second slide. It was kind of around the question of doubling down on your assets.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm finding that right now I have this temptation to sort of do the exact opposite. So it was really important for me to hear that, I think,
Mm-hmm.
and to be like, oh, okay, I kind of want to run away from the things I know I'm already good at, because they're almost a little bit more boring to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I was actually kind of curious, if you might walk us through your process on developing the Strategy Supper Club. Was it did you consider things that were sort of further out of your comfort zone, or things that were even closer? Because I'd be just interested in your process on kind of finding that balance of what feels interesting in a stretch and what feels kind of this is delivering on my assets and going to help me make money and build my brand.
Yeah, no, Anna, that's a great question. So I have wanted to teach strategy in a more formal sense for a really long time. I really enjoy teaching. And when I was at W&W, I really wanted to start this thing called Wolf School, where we were being a brand strategy teaching hub in the industry, because I see a lot of holes in it. And doing brand strategy teaching in a way that not only teaches the skills, but also teaches the human side of it. And I think that we're getting a little skills obsessed right now as brand strategists. We think if we just have the right framework, we can solve everything. Whereas so much of what we do is EQ and knowing how to manage people. So that's kind of my underlying drive on it. So I actually was thinking about starting a school for 5 years, right? And then all this stuff happened with the pandemic, and my business pulled back for a few weeks. And I was like, oh, what am I going to do? Now, I could have done this massive monetization plan against it, right? In fact, there is one. And at some point I would like to, perhaps charge for sessions, not always have a free component, but do more stuff. But instead of being okay, cool, I'm going to start a whole new thing right now, a whole new offering, a whole new revenue stream in my life. Instead, I was let me just try hosting a class once a week or twice a week and see how it feels, right? So instead of just going balls in and being I'm going to just invest all this time, money, emotional energy into setting up a fully baked offering to the world, I'm going to try to nibble on it and see how the nibble feels. And what it's doing is it's taking the thing that my skill of being a brand strategist, and instead of applying it to client work, like I've been doing for a long time, it's taking that core skill and applying it to another place. So I'm still doing brand strategy, but I'm just not doing it for a client right now. So it's a new leverage. It's an old school being leveraged in a new way. And that's kind of the point I was trying to make with this, is we all have these core skills that we have to lean on, but we also need to evolve in the new concepts, in the new context, excuse me. And so how do we do that? And so I think Strategy Supper Club is a decent example of me playing around with my own principle.
Yes. So I wanted to ask you, how can you do the small bits? Because I keep having ideas and I want to create this. No, I want to create this site. No, I want to create this project. And I'm just that person that has like 10 projects in her mind, but then I stop myself because I criticize my idea too much that I'm like, nah. So how do you push it like completely like, come on, just throw it there?
Just go with it. I think one thing is that if I also can think of like 10 ideas of things to do in a day. Like I have that kind of brain as well. I give myself a test. I also do this with shopping as well. If I'm thinking about it a week later, then I need to like think about it a little more. So if it sticks, I have to think about it a little bit more. And then if I'm thinking about it a week after that, then it's like, oh, fuck it, I just have to do it. I have to try. So, but also try it like in the most lightweight way possible to see if there's anything, if there's a there, before going full hog on anything. So for me, it's about time. It's like, if it's still like bothering me, if it's still sticking in my brain, then I need to honor that, you know?
Okay, so like a light launching.
What's that?
No, like kind of doing a light launching. So it's out there, but navigating.
Yeah, and see how it feels to do it, you know, see if you like it. I mean, that's certainly where Supper Club started. I've been talking about doing a strategy school for like 5 years. I always wanted to do one out of W&W. I wanted to do Wolf School, and I wanted to like create a full-on strategy school because I felt like there was just a big hole in the marketplace. The people that were teaching just weren't great, and always put it off. And then this came around, and I was just like, well, what does it hurt to talk to 20 people? Like, may as well try. So it's like that. And if I don't want to do this anymore, thank you, Meredith, then, there's no harm. Like there hasn't been a massive investment. I just tried it, and it can go away just as easily. And I'll know. And that's the thing that's important for me.